The holographic message appeared in the Grand Council chamber, and its red light made strange shadows on the walls. Commander Jake Morrison stood perfectly still in his military uniform as the alien ambassador began to speak. The creature looked like a giant insect with multiple eyes and sharp mandibles that clicked when it talked. Its voice echoed through the massive hall where hundreds of alien delegates sat watching. The Vrax ambassador raised one of its limbs and announced that the ancient Armistice was over. The peace treaty that had existed between humanity and the collective for 3,500 years was now dissolved. The ambassador explained that humans had become too numerous and too ambitious. The collective wanted to reclaim 17 star systems that humans currently occupied in the buffer zone. Humans had 30 days to evacuate everything and everyone. After that deadline, any human presence would be considered an act of war. Jake allowed himself a tiny smile. Behind him stood Admiral Helen Carter, who remained completely expressionless, but Jake could sense her amusement. They had served together for many years and knew each other well. The other human delegates, including Kate Rogers and Greg Palmer, also kept their faces neutral and calm. None of them showed any sign of worry or fear. What the collective did not know was that humanity had been preparing for this exact moment for 3,000 years. The Armistice had never really been about peace for humans. It had been about buying time. Lots and lots of time. Humanity first met the collective in the year 2247, and that meeting had gone very badly. 5 powerful alien civilizations had united against the newcomers. They saw humans as dangerous and aggressive. The resulting conflict lasted only 12 days, but it was devastating for humanity. Earth's best warships were destroyed easily. The alien technology was far superior. Humanity had no choice but to accept the Armistice terms or face complete extinction. But humans possessed something the aliens never fully understood. Humans knew how to wait. Humans knew how to plan. Humans knew how to hold a grudge for a very long time. Jake stepped forward and spoke clearly. He told the Vrax ambassador that the United Terran Federation acknowledged their declaration. Humanity would respond within the 30 days as specified. His voice was calm and professional. The Vrax ambassador's many eyes glittered with what looked like satisfaction. The creature said that perhaps humans had finally learned some humility after all these centuries. Perhaps they understood their place in the galaxy now. As the hologram faded away, Helen finally let herself smile. She turned to Kate and gave a quiet order. Kate was to send out the priority alpha signal immediately. Kate nodded and her fingers moved quickly across her electronic tablet. All across human space, from the oldest colonies to the newest outposts, a single encrypted message began spreading. The message was simple and direct. The long wait is over. Greg leaned close to Jake and whispered quietly. He asked if Jake thought the aliens had any idea what was coming their way. Jake's smile grew just a little bit wider. He replied that the aliens had no idea at all, not even the smallest clue. In secret facilities across human space, the message was received and understood. Military commanders read it and began issuing orders. Scientists checked their equipment one final time. Ship captains powered up vessels that had been waiting in hidden berths for centuries. Soldiers who had trained their entire lives for a war they thought might never come, suddenly realized their training was about to be tested. The machinery of war began to move, but not in the way the collective expected. There was no panic, no rushed preparations, no desperate scrambling. Everything moved with calm precision because every single step had been planned and practiced thousands of times over thousands of years. In the orbital stations, around Earth, technicians activated systems that had been in standby mode. Manufacturing facilities that appeared to produce civilian goods quietly shifted to their true purpose. Cargo vessels that seemed to carry trade goods opened hidden compartments containing something very different. The collective had been watching humanity for 35 centuries. They had monitored the 17 buffer systems constantly. They had tracked human population growth and technological development. They had spies and sensors and informants. They thought they knew everything about humanity's capabilities. They were completely wrong. What the collective saw was a carefully constructed lie. Humanity had spent 3.5 millennia perfecting the art of deception. Every ship that entered collective space used old technology. Every diplomatic exchange revealed nothing important. Every trade deal and scientific collaboration was designed to reinforce a single false belief. The aliens believed humanity was contained. They believed humanity was limited. They believed humanity was weak. The truth was something entirely different. While the collective watched 17 systems, humanity had been expanding in every direction. The aliens were not looking. Generation ships had been sent out centuries ago using experimental drives. These ships traveled to distant regions of space far beyond collective territory. Each ship carried everything needed to build a new colony. Each colony built more ships. Each new system added to humanity's growing strength. By the time the Vrax declared war, humanity occupied over 300 star systems. The industrial capacity hidden in those systems was greater than the entire collective combined. The weapons developed in secret laboratories were centuries ahead of anything the aliens possessed. The military forces trained in hidden academies numbered in the billions, but the collective knew none of this. They saw what humans wanted them to see. They believed what humans wanted them to believe. Jake and Helen left the council chamber and walked through the corridors of the space station. Other aliens watched them pass. Some looked smug and satisfied. Others looked sympathetic, thinking humanity was about to suffer a terrible defeat. None of them understood the truth. When they reached their private shuttle, Helen finally laughed out loud. She said the Vrax had just made the biggest mistake in their species' history. Jake agreed. He said that in 30 days the collective would learn what humanity had become. They would learn what happened when you gave humans 3,000 years to prepare. They would learn that patience was not weakness. They would learn that silence was not surrender. The shuttle departed from the station and began its journey back to human space. Behind them, the collective celebrated what they thought was a great victory. Ahead of them, humanity prepared to reveal the truth. The long wait was over, and the collective was about to receive an education they would never forget. The Vrax war fleet entered the Epsilon sector with complete confidence. 300 massive warships moved through space in perfect formation. Each vessel was enormous and covered with weapons capable of destroying entire cities. Fleet Commander Zrax stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the tactical displays. Everything was going exactly as planned. The sensor officer reported that no human military vessels were detected in the area. The colonies appeared to be evacuating just as the collective had demanded. Transport ships were moving away from the planets carrying civilians and cargo. Zrax felt satisfied. The humans were being sensible. They understood they could not win. Zrax gave his next order. The fleet was to pursue the transport ships and destroy them. He wanted to teach humanity a lesson about the cost of defiance. He wanted survivors to carry stories. Of Vrax power back to Earth, fear would make the remaining humans more cooperative. What happened next took only seconds, but those seconds changed everything. The human transport ships simply vanished. They did not explode. They did not jump to faster than light travel. They just disappeared as if they had never existed. Before Zrax could even ask for an explanation, space itself seemed to tear open. Massive structures began emerging from nowhere. The sensors screamed warnings as energy readings climbed to impossible levels. The sensor officer's voice shook with confusion and fear. He reported energy signatures that did not match anything in the collective database. The power readings were so high they had to be errors. Nothing could generate that much energy. It was physically impossible according to everything the collective knew about science. But the readings were not errors. The structures were ships. Human ships. They were unlike anything the Vrax had ever encountered. Each one was at least 10 times larger than a Vrax dreadnought. They moved with impossible grace despite their enormous size. Their hulls seemed to absorb sensor beams instead of reflecting them. Looking at them made Zrax's eyes hurt. Captain Paul Bennett stood on the bridge of the human vessel Retribution and watched the Vrax fleet with cold eyes. His tactical officer, Lisa Morgan, monitored the enemy positions and reported that all human ships were ready. Weapon systems were charged and locked onto targets. They were waiting for orders. Paul told them to hold position. He wanted the Vrax to have time to think, time to realize something was very wrong. The aliens had enjoyed 3,000 years of peace and safety. Humanity had spent those same years preparing for this exact moment. Let them wonder. Let them fear. On the Vrax flagship, Zrax was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. He ordered his communications officer to contact the human ships and demand their surrender. Perhaps if the humans gave up immediately, the situation could be salvaged. The human response was not words. It was action. The human ships opened fire, and what the Vrax saw defied belief. The weapons humanity used were nothing like the primitive missiles and lasers the collective employed. These weapons seemed to ignore the normal rules of physics. They did not travel through space in any conventional way. They simply appeared at their targets as if distance meant nothing. The Vrax shields had been designed to stop anything the collective could throw at them. They were considered the best defensive technology in known space. Multiple layers of energy fields could absorb tremendous amounts of damage. The shields simply stopped existing. One moment they were there. The next moment they were gone, as if someone had erased them from reality. The hull armor beneath the shields was rated to survive direct hits from antimatter weapons. It was thick and strong and had protected Vrax ships for centuries. The human weapons touched the armor and it evaporated. Metal that should have taken hours to cut through with industrial lasers just disappeared like morning fog. The destruction lasted 47 seconds. When it was over, the Vrax armada no longer existed. 300 mighty warships had been reduced to expanding clouds of glowing debris. Millions of Virax warriors who had expected an easy victory were simply gone. 3 ships survived, but only because Lieutenant Commander Chris Hayes deliberately spared them. Chris coordinated the targeting solutions from his station on the Retribution. He made sure those 3 ships took no damage at all. When Paul asked why, Chris explained his reasoning. Someone needed to survive to tell the story. Someone needed to carry the message back to the collective. Let them run. Let them tell everyone what happened here. Paul nodded in approval. Fear was a weapon too. 3 survivors would spread the tale across the entire collective. Every species would hear about how the mighty Vrax fleet had been destroyed in less than a minute. Every species would wonder if their own fleets could do any better. Every species would have to reconsider everything they thought they knew about humanity. The 3 surviving Vrax ships fled at maximum speed. Their crews were in shock. Many could not believe what they had witnessed. Surely their sensors had malfunctioned. Surely some kind of trick had been used. But deep down they knew the truth. The humans had let them live on purpose. The humans could have killed them just as easily. The humans wanted them to run home and spread fear. Back on the Retribution, Paul addressed his crew. He told them they had performed admirably. Their training had paid off. Their patience had been rewarded. But this was just the beginning. The collective would not accept this defeat quietly. They would gather their forces and come back stronger. Humanity needed to be ready. Lisa asked if Paul thought the collective would sue for peace after seeing what humanity could do. Paul shook his head. Pride and fear would drive them to try again. They would convince themselves that the Virax had made tactical errors. They would believe their combined forces could overwhelm humanity through sheer numbers. They would be wrong, but they would try anyway. Chris pointed out that every battle would make victory easier. Each time the collective attacked and failed, more species would lose faith. Eventually, some would break away from the alliance. Some would seek separate peace deals. The collective would fracture from within. Paul agreed, but said humanity must not become overconfident. Overconfidence had led the Vrax to their doom. Humanity would continue to be cautious and prepared. They would use overwhelming force when necessary. They would show mercy when possible. They would prove that humanity was not the threat the collective feared, but rather a partner they should have accepted long ago. As the human fleet regrouped and began moving toward their next objective, the debris from the Vrax ships continued expanding outward. In time, it would form a ring around the nearest planet. Future generations would see it and remember. Remember that humanity had been pushed too far. Remember that patience had limits. Remember that 3,000 years of preparation had consequences. The education of the collective had begun, and the first lesson had been written in fire and destruction across the void of space. The collective council gathered in emergency session aboard Unity Prime. The ancient station had orbited the binary stars of the Rick system for over 10,000 years. Representatives from all 14 member species filled the massive amphitheater. The atmosphere was tense and chaotic. Various aliens expressed their agitation in different ways, creating a mixture of sounds and smells and flashing lights. The Vrax ambassador stood before the council with his carapace looking dull and lifeless. This was a sign of deep shame among his species. He presented recordings of the battle to the assembled delegates. The enormous chamber fell completely silent as the footage played. Everyone watched as 300 Virax warships were destroyed in less than 1 minute. Ambassador Thren of the Korthan Dominion spoke first after the recording ended. His crystalline body pulsed with colors that indicated disbelief and confusion. He stated that the destruction they had witnessed was impossible. Collective intelligence had reported that human technology had barely advanced since the Armistice. Humans possessed no weapons capable of such devastating power. Then your intelligence was wrong. The voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Admiral Helen Carter walked into the amphitheater accompanied by a small group of human officers. She had arrived without invitation. Her ship had materialized in orbit around Unity Prime without any warning. None of the station's sophisticated sensors had detected her approach. Supreme Coordinator Vexil demanded to know how the humans had breached station security. Unity Prime had defenses that had protected it for millennia. No unauthorized vessel had ever gotten close without being detected and challenged. How had Helen's ship simply appeared in orbit? Helen smiled that cold smile that was becoming familiar to the collective. She calmly informed them that human ships had been in position around Unity Prime for 6 hours. They could have destroyed the station at any time. They had chosen to wait for the council to finish watching the battle recordings. She wanted them to understand their situation before she spoke. Lieutenant Amy Foster stood near the entrance with her hand resting casually near her sidearm. The gesture looked relaxed, but every being in the chamber understood its true meaning. Next to her, Dr. Nathan Pierce observed the council members with professional interest. He was studying their reactions and body language. Helen continued speaking. She reminded them that 35 centuries ago, the collective had defeated humanity because humans were young and unprepared. The collective had dictated harsh terms and humanity had accepted because there had been no other choice. But the collective had made one critical error in that ancient war. Vexil asked what error she meant, though his tone suggested he was beginning to understand. Helen stated the error simply. You left us alive. She activated a holographic display that showed a map of known space. Human territory appeared in blue, while collective space showed in various other colors. The map seemed normal at first. Then Helen changed the display settings and the true picture emerged. Beyond the boundaries that the collective had been monitoring, humanity had expanded in every direction. The map now showed human presence in over 300 star systems. These systems formed a vast sphere that partially surrounded collective space. Each system contained industrial facilities and defensive fortifications and large populations. Helen explained that the collective had given humanity a precious gift. That gift was time. Time to build and expand and develop. Time to become strong, while the collective spent 3,000 years congratulating themselves on containing the human threat. Humans spent those same years growing in secret. The collective had monitored 17 buffer systems and assumed that was all of human space. They had never looked beyond their own borders. She continued by saying that humanity had learned valuable lessons from the collective. Humans learned patience. They learned to hide their true strength. They learned to appear weak while secretly becoming powerful. They learned these lessons well. Commander Thren asked why humanity would reveal such power now. If humans possessed such overwhelming military advantage, why not strike without warning? Why give the collective any chance to prepare? Because we are not like you. Helen's voice was firm but not angry. She explained that humanity did not want genocide. Humans did not want endless war. Humanity wanted what it had always wanted, which was simply to be left alone to explore the galaxy. But humanity would not accept being caged anymore. Humans would not tolerate being contained. They would not allow threats to their people. She paused to let her words sink in. The Vrex had declared war. Humanity responded. This was what happened when patience was mistaken for weakness. This was what happened when you threatened humanity. Helen deactivated the display and looked directly at Vexil. She stated that humanity was offering the collective the same thing. The collective had offered humanity long ago. Terms. But there was an important difference. Human terms were designed to create lasting peace, not temporary containment. Humanity wanted to become a partner in galactic exploration, not an enemy. The silence in the chamber stretched for a long time. Finally, Commander Zeth of the Korthan Dominion spoke. He was ancient even by his species standards. He had participated in the first war against humanity, and had somehow survived long enough to witness this moment. He said that he remembered humans as they were back then. Fierce and brave, but ultimately unprepared for the realities of galactic warfare. Zeth continued by saying that he now saw what humanity had become. Humans had earned their place among the stars not through conquest but through patience and careful preparation. He voted to accept whatever terms humanity offered. One by one, the other species' representatives agreed. Some did so reluctantly. Others seemed relieved that a diplomatic solution was possible. The Vrax ambassador was the last to speak. The shame in his voice was obvious. He admitted that his people had underestimated humanity badly. The Vrax would not make that mistake again. Kate Rogers, who had remained quiet until now, stepped forward with a data tablet. She presented the Treaty of New Understanding. The document was surprisingly simple. The old armistice that had treated humanity as a threat to be watched and contained would be dissolved. In its place, both sides would recognize each other's sovereignty. Neither would enter the other's territory without invitation. Trade and scientific exchange would occur when both parties agreed it was beneficial. Peaceful relations would be maintained because cooperation benefited everyone. Vexel asked what would happen if the collective refused these terms. Captain Paul Bennett answered that question. His voice was hard as steel. He stated that if the collective refused, then they would discover exactly how far ahead humanity had actually advanced. The weapons used to destroy the Vrax fleet were 800 years old. They came from defensive stockpiles. Humanity had developed much more sophisticated weapons since then. Did the collective want to see what modern human military technology could do? The holographic display activated again, showing technical schematics. Even the collective's most brilliant scientists gasped when they saw the designs. Weapons that could sterilize entire planets without harming the underlying ecosystem. Propulsion systems that moved ships through dimensions the collective had never theorized. Defensive shields that could make entire stars invisible to sensors. Behind all this technology was the industrial might of 300 hidden systems now revealed. Vexel spoke quietly. He said that humanity had been preparing to destroy the collective all along. Helen corrected him firmly. No, humanity had been preparing to survive the collective. There was a very important difference. Destruction was easy. Any species with sufficient technology could destroy. Survival required planning and patience and wisdom. It required knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. She deactivated the display and met Vexel's gaze directly. Humanity was offering the collective the same choice they had given humans 3,500 years ago. Terms. But human terms were designed for lasting peace. Sign the treaty, and humanity would become a partner in exploring the cosmos. Refuse and humanity would continue doing what it always did. Survive and expand and thrive with or without collective approval. The council chamber remained silent as the representatives considered their options. The choice was clear and the consequences of refusal were obvious. One by one, they began to signal their acceptance. Colonel Steve Murphy sat deep beneath the surface of Luna in the military archives. His assistant, Lieutenant Karen Walsh, worked beside him. They were reviewing historical records and preparing a comprehensive account of the long preparation. This information would be preserved for future generations. It was important that humans never forgot what their ancestors had accomplished. Steve began recording his narration. He explained that the secret planning started only 3 months after the original armistice was signed. Earth's surviving military leaders and top scientists had held a secret meeting. They called themselves the Continuity Council. The name was simple but meaningful. They would ensure humanity continued to exist no matter what. Karen pulled up files on her computer display. She explained that the initial plan had been simple in concept, but massive in scope. The council divided humanity's efforts into 2 streams. One stream would be visible to the collective. The other would remain hidden. The visible stream was everything the aliens could observe. 17 star systems in the buffer zone developing at what seemed like a modest pace. Trade ships carrying goods between systems. Scientific vessels exploring nearby space. Peaceful colonization of new worlds. Humanity played the role of defeated warriors who had learned their lesson. They appeared to be reluctant but cooperative members of galactic civilization. The invisible stream was something completely different. Steve continued his narration. The Continuity Council sent out generation ships into deep space. These were not the slow vessels the collective knew about. They were experimental craft using prototype faster than light drives. Each ship carried a complete industrial database in digital form. They also carried military specifications and manufacturing templates. Each ship had a single directive: expand and build and remain hidden, Karen highlighted a section of the timeline. The real breakthrough came in the year 2891. That was roughly 600 years after the Armistice began. Dr. Lisa Hamilton and her research team working at a secret facility on Mars finally cracked stable quantum entanglement for communications. This changed everything. Suddenly, all those hidden colonies scattered across space could coordinate their activities. The map on their display showed the expansion like watching a plant grow in fast motion. One colony became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 8. The growth was exponential. Each new system brought resources and manufacturing capability and trained personnel. By year 1500 of the Armistice, humanity controlled more industrial capacity than the entire collective. And the collective had no idea any of it existed. Steve described the shipbuilding effort. Humanity built thousands of warships, entire fleets that never saw combat. They existed only to test new designs and train crews. Engineers built weapons and then immediately designed countermeasures against those same weapons. Military planners war-gamed scenarios where they fought against themselves. They always assumed their enemy would be at least as capable as humanity. This forced them to constantly improve. An archived interview appeared on their screen. Captain Ben Porter had been one of the last survivors of the original 12-day war. He lived long enough to see humanity's transformation. His elderly face showed determination despite his age. The recording showed him explaining the strategy. Humanity could not beat the collective with brute force, so they decided to beat them with time. Every year the collective remained complacent was a year humanity pulled further ahead. Every year they thought they had humans contained was a year humans grew stronger. Karen pulled up another file showing social programs. The social engineering had been just as important as the technology. The Continuity Council cultivated a culture of military service across all human worlds, not aggressive or warlike but watchful and ready. Every human child learned basic strategy and tactics alongside regular education. Mathematics and literature and military theory were all taught together. It became part of human identity. Steve added that the collective never noticed because humans were very careful. Every human ship that entered collective space used technology that was at least 200 years behind current human capabilities. Every trade negotiation and every scientific exchange and every diplomatic interaction was carefully managed. Everything reinforced the collective's belief that humanity was weak and contained. The archives contained thousands of such details. Hidden shipyards and star systems the collective had never explored. Research stations developing advanced weapons in complete secrecy. Training academies where humanity's best minds learned to think like their potential enemies. Intelligence networks that watched the collective's every move while revealing nothing in return. Karen made an observation about the discipline required. She stated that it was the greatest deception in human history. An entire civilization pretending to be something it was not for 3,500 years. The level of coordination and patience required was almost beyond imagination. Steve nodded in agreement. But humanity had done it. They had waited. They had prepared. They had maintained the deception across generations. When the Virax finally declared war, humanity was completely ready. He pulled up more files showing the industrial capacity humanity had hidden. Orbital shipyards around stars the collective did not know humans had reached. Massive factories on planets that appeared on no official maps. Mining operations extracting resources from asteroid fields and unexplored systems. All of it hidden. All of it waiting. Karen displayed statistics about the military buildup. By the time the Armistice ended, humanity had more trained military personnel than the collective had total population in some species. The human fleet outnumbered the combined collective navies. Human weapons technology was centuries more advanced. The industrial capacity to build more ships and weapons and defenses was overwhelming. But the collective had seen none of this. They monitored their sensors and watched their 17 systems and convinced themselves they understood humanity's capabilities. They were spectacularly wrong. Steve recorded more details about the intelligence operations. Human agents had infiltrated collective society at every level. Some posed as traitors. Others worked as scientists or diplomats. They gathered information constantly. They learned the strengths and weaknesses of every collective species. They identified key infrastructure and military installations. They mapped supply lines and communication networks. All of this information fed back to human military planners. By the time war was declared, humanity knew more about the collective than the collective knew about itself. Human strategists could predict how each species would respond to different situations. They knew which alliances were strong and which were fragile. They knew where to apply pressure for maximum effect. Karen brought up files about the weapon development programs. She explained that humanity had developed weapons the collective could not even imagine. Quantum collapse fields that could compress matter to impossible densities. Dimensional shearing devices that could cut through any material. Temporal displacement weapons that could age targets thousands of years in seconds. All of this existed in testing and production. But the most important weapon was not technological. It was psychological. Humanity understood that fear and uncertainty could be more effective than any bomb. The complete destruction of the Vrax fleet in less than a minute sent a message. The message was simple. Human patience had limits. Human mercy was not weakness. Human technology was beyond anything the collective could counter. Steve concluded this section of his recording. He stated that the long preparation showed what humanity could accomplish when properly motivated. 3,500 years of focused effort had transformed a defeated species into the most powerful force in known space. Not through aggression, but through patience. Not through conquest, but through careful planning. Karen saved all the files and recordings. This information would be studied by historians for generations. Future humans would learn about the dedication of their ancestors. They would understand the price of freedom. They would remember that strength came not from violence, but from preparation and patience. The archive was complete. The story of the long preparation was preserved. Future generations would know exactly what humanity had accomplished and why. They would understand that the cold smile humans wore when the Vrax declared war was earned, through 3.5 millennia of sacrifice and planning. The second collective fleet arrived at the border 6 weeks after the Vrax defeat. This fleet made the first one look like a small patrol. 2,000 warships from all 14 member species moved together in formation. They represented the combined military might of an alliance that had dominated this region of space for thousands of years. The commanders expected fierce resistance. They came prepared for a real battle. What they found instead surprised them completely. A single human ship waited at the designated coordinates. Admiral Helen Carter commanded the vessel. Captain Paul Bennett served as her second officer. The small diplomatic team included Commander Jake Morrison and Ambassador Kate Rogers. They appeared calm and unworried. Supreme Coordinator Vexel appeared via hologram. Military commanders from each collective species flanked him in the projection. His translator converted his species' subsonic rumbles into sounds humans could understand. He announced that the collective had come to offer terms. If humanity surrendered immediately, the collective would show mercy. There would be no more destruction. Helen Carter actually laughed. The sound was not mean or mocking. It was genuine amusement. She told Vexel that he still did not understand the situation. She suggested he look at his strategic display. Actually, look at it carefully. The collective commanders did as she suggested. Slowly, their expressions changed from confidence to confusion and then to horror. Their massive fleet of 2,000 warships should have dominated the sensor screens. Instead, they saw something else. The human ships they expected to fight were nowhere visible. Surrounding their entire fleet in a perfect sphere were sensor signatures. Tens of thousands of them. Helen explained calmly what they were seeing. Those signatures were mines. Each one was capable of generating a localized quantum collapse field. Within 3 seconds of her command, the entire collective fleet would be compressed to the size of a tennis ball. The mines had been deployed during their conversation. The collective had not detected the deployment because human stealth technology was that advanced. Commander Zeth of the Korthan Dominion made a sound that his species used to express profound awe. He had survived the first war against humanity 35 centuries ago. His species had developed technology to keep him alive through the millennia. He had seen many things in his long life, but nothing like this. He asked why humanity would create such overwhelming force but choose to talk instead of simply destroying them. Jake Morrison answered the question. He explained that humanity had learned something valuable from the collective during the long wait. Even forced peace had value. Humanity did not want to rule the galaxy. Humans had no interest in conquering alien worlds or enslaving other species. They wanted something much simpler. Recognition of one basic truth. Kate Rogers activated a holographic document. She presented the Treaty of New Understanding. The document was surprisingly short and straightforward. The old Armistice, which treated humanity as a threat to be contained, would be permanently dissolved. In its place, both sides would recognize each other's sovereignty. Neither would enter the other's space without invitation. Trade would happen only if both parties agreed it was beneficial. Scientific knowledge would be shared when cooperation served both interests. Peaceful relations would be maintained because everyone benefited from cooperation. Bexel asked the obvious question. What happens if we refuse? Paul Bennett provided the answer. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. If the collective refused, then they would discover exactly how far ahead humanity had advanced. The Vrax fleet had been destroyed using weapons from defensive stockpiles. That technology was 800 years old by human standards. Would the collective like to see what humanity had built more recently? The holographic display shifted to show technical schematics. Collective scientists gasped when they saw the designs. Some looked away because the implications were too disturbing. The display showed weapons that could sterilize entire planets while leaving the ecosystem intact. Propulsion drives that could move ships through dimensions the collective had not even theorized existed. Defensive systems capable of making entire stars invisible to any known sensor technology. Behind all this was the industrial might of 300 hidden systems now revealed on the display. Vexel spoke very quietly. He said that humanity had been preparing to destroy the collective all along. Helen corrected him immediately. The correction was important. No, she said firmly. Humanity had been preparing to survive the collective. There was a crucial difference. Destruction was easy. Any species with sufficient technology could destroy things. Survival required much more. It required planning and patience and wisdom. It required knowing when to fight and when to negotiate and when to show mercy. She turned off the display and looked directly at Vexil. Her next words carried enormous weight. Humanity was offering the collective the same choice they had given humans 35 centuries ago. Terms. But human terms were designed to ensure lasting peace, not temporary containment. Sign the treaty and humanity becomes your partner in exploring the cosmos. Refuse and humanity will do what it has always done. Survive and expand and thrive whether the collective approves or not. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Commander Zeth spoke again. He said that he had fought in the First War. He remembered humans as they were back then, fierce and brave but ultimately unprepared for galactic conflict. He saw now what humanity had become. Humans had earned their place among the stars not through conquest but through patience and preparation. He voted to accept the terms. One by one, the other commanders agreed. Some did so quickly. Others took more time to consider. The Vrax ambassador, still bearing the shame of his fleet's destruction, was the last to speak. He admitted that the Vrax had underestimated humanity badly. His species would not make that mistake again. He voted to accept the treaty. 3 months passed before the Treaty of New Understanding was formally ratified. The ceremony took place on Earth in the restored ruins of the United Nations building. This was where humanity had first unified after the 12-day war. Representatives from all 14 collective species attended. They walked on humanity's homeworld for the first time since the ancient conflict. Admiral Helen Carter stood with Commander Jake Morrison watching the ceremony. Both had retired from military service to become ambassadors in this new era. They observed as human children played with young aliens from various species. The next generation was already building bridges their ancestors could never have imagined. Jake asked Helen if she thought the peace would last. Helen smiled. That cold smile had transformed into something warmer over the months. She said that it did not really matter if it lasted forever. Humanity was ready if peace failed. But she believed the collective had learned the same lesson humanity learned. Peace was not about trust. Peace was about mutual respect. Peace was about understanding that war served no one's interests when both sides had the power to destroy each other. She turned to look at the gathered delegates. Ships from a dozen species orbited Earth in harmony. The sight would have been impossible to imagine 6 months ago. Helen continued speaking. Humanity had waited 3,500 years for this moment. Humans smiled coldly when the Vrax declared war because they knew something the aliens did not. Humanity had already won, not through violence but through patience and preparation and refusing to let anyone else define their destiny. Jake asked what comes next. Helen's response was thoughtful. Now humanity shows the galaxy what humans can really accomplish when not preparing for war. Now they show what can be built instead of what can be destroyed. Now they demonstrate that the species the collective tried to cage has become something unexpected. Not conquerors, not victims, partners in the great adventure of existence. Behind them, a human child's laughter mixed with the clicking sounds of joy from a young Vrax. The two youngsters were playing a game together. Neither cared about the ancient war or the recent tension. They were simply two children enjoying each other's company. The long wait was over. The war had been won without most of it being fought. Humanity's cold smile had transformed into something the galaxy desperately needed: hope for a better future. Paul Bennett joined Helen and Jake. He brought news from the outer colonies. Human ships were beginning joint exploration missions with collective vessels. Scientists from multiple species were collaborating on research projects. Trade agreements were being finalized. The galaxy was changing faster than anyone expected. Helen said this was just the beginning. Humanity had spent 35 centuries focused on survival. Now they could focus on growth and discovery. Now they could show the galaxy what human creativity and determination could accomplish when applied to building rather than preparing for war. Jake pointed out that some species would remain suspicious. Old prejudices would take time to fade. There would be incidents and misunderstandings. The path forward would not be smooth. Helen agreed, but said that was acceptable. Nothing worthwhile was ever easy. Humanity had proven they could wait. They could be patient. They could work toward long-term goals. If building lasting peace took another 3,000 years, then so be it. Humanity had time. The ceremony concluded with all parties signing the treaty. The document,